When you see that intro, what do you feel? If you're like me, you probably feel much needed joy in our very, very grim society. But you get what I'm trying to say. Pixar reinvented the entire concept of animation when releasing the animated film you all know we grew up with. Now, of course, I was born in 2001, so I was about 6 years too late to the party, but the bottom line is, we all saw it. You better believe a looming juggernaut saw it too. With all the excitement surrounding Pixar in 1995, by 97, Pixar and Walt Disney Studios would come together to announce an agreement to produce 5 movies over the next 10 years. Man, those were the days. 5 movies in a decade? Now we get like 20 from the same studio. And in a decade? Nah, man, like 2 days. I could end the video there, but I'll keep it going. With the plan in sight, and Disney adults and newly made Pixar darlings ready to empty their wallets, Pixar was about to carry Disney for the next decade. And honestly, they would do it up until about 2015, in which... Yeah. And look, we'll get there, as they did drop another film that year that is simply a classic. With all the love I have for Pixar, as you can see on my jacket, and admittedly all the love I have for Disney, we have to discuss why Disney must free Pixar. When you discuss the origins of Pixar, you almost always have to bring up Disney. Not because either is better than the other, but more so because they pretty much can't exist without one another. Now, of course, animation has existed long before Disney and Pixar, but for this video, I promise we'll stay on topic. Pixar has been around since 1979, just under a different name. You see, George Lucas, obviously head of Lucasfilm, would hire Ed Catmull to lead a computer division at Lucasfilm. Even in the 80s, were Pixar known to be innovators, creating things like the Genesis effect sequence for Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which would be the first fully computer animated sequence in a feature film, and the stained glass night sequence seen in Young Sherlock Holmes. During this time, they would also create their first film resolution image, The Road to Paint Rays, and their first short film, The Adventures of Andre and Wally B. Their success here would lead to their eventual independence in 1986, as Steve Jobs would purchase the company from George Lucas. Man, this guy really needs to stop selling everything. But this would fully establish them as an independent company. They would officially call themselves Pixar, and by 1986, as collaborations between Pixar and Disney would begin, Pixar would create the award-winning short film, Luxo Jr. This Oscar-nominated short would prove extremely impactful on the studio, both in its iconic stature and, well, legally. You see, Luxo was based on a lamp created by the Norwegian company literally called Luxo. Tensions between Pixar and Luxo didn't truly rise until 2009 when Pixar tried to sell merchandise of the Luxo Junior lamp. But the problem was, it wasn't manufactured by the Norwegian company. Lawsuits were brought up, but ultimately Disney would end it, noting they would no longer sell the lamps as long as Pixar was allowed to keep the lamp as a mascot. Now, back to the 80s. After the success of the short, as you may know, the lamp would grace our eyes in every feature film since. Pixar would later release more short films like Red's Dream, Tin Toy, Knick Knack, which was their first short produced in stereoscopic 3D, and later created commercials that would further their experience in the industry. By 1995, they would officially release Toy Story, and it would be the highest grossing film that year, making $362 million worldwide. Phew, now that the history is out the way, let's get to the fun part. So by 97, Disney and Pixar agreed to come together to produce 5 movies over 10 years. Not buy, just come together for a decade. During this time, they would produce A Bug's Life, Toy Story 2, Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, my personal favorite Pixar film, The Incredibles, and Cars alongside some short films. At this time of 2006, the Walt Disney Company would officially announce the purchase of Pixar Animation Studios for $7.4 billion. My goodness. Now, regardless of your feelings toward Cars, which in my opinion is underrated, stop acting like you don't get hype when you hear Life is a Highway, but many would consider this the middle of the golden age of Pixar. I mean, the Disney purchase wasn't all bad in the beginning. I mean, it certainly wasn't for Disney, seeing as Bob Iger makes it clear that it was Disney's best acquisition to date. And that's no lie. Disney needed Pixar to acquire modern technology to compete in the bustling new wave of computer animation, and the merger made the company a lot bigger, period. Pixar benefited in terms of merchandising and marketing. However, the problem came from, you guessed it, creative freedom. Let's get something straight, people. With the influx of live-action remakes, reboots, and sequels, Disney is well aware that people aren't happy about it, but they clearly make good money off of it. Now, I'm not about to lecture you about why it's your fault, blah, 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 because it's not your fault. However, when these live-action remakes and sequels succeed, Disney sees it, and boy do they capitalize off of it. They're a merchandising company, so a successful animated film that can produce toys is always great for them, meaning remake after remake, since it's easy money. Now, it should be said, I have no idea if Disney is breathing down the necks of Pixar's creative directors, but I'm sure you guys were around last year in 2022 when Florida's Don't Say Gay bill was enacted. Ron DeSantis, a very evil person by the way, to this day has been causing trouble, including backing the banning of Black American studies in public schools and being in a very public battle with Disney. Right now, actually. But during this time of 2022, Bob Chapek was the center of some pretty bad press as the great people at Pixar stood up to the then CEO, questioning his silence of the Don't Say Gay bill. The Pixar employees and even Disney park employees voiced their frustrations that a company that makes so much money off of pride could stay so silent on such a harmful bill, even remarking, 8 days after Russia invaded Ukraine, Disney paused the release of theatrical films in Russia and announced, "We will make future business decisions based on the evolving situation." Following the siege on the Capitol in 2021, Disney stopped all political donations to members of Congress who had objected to the presidential election results. In 2016, Disney told the state of Georgia, "We will plan to take our business elsewhere should any legislation allowing discriminatory practices be signed into state law." In response to the controversial religious liberty bill, by taking a stand, Disney directly affected the legislative outcome in Georgia. It has been proven that Disney's corporate statements can and do make a difference. This is a very powerful statement, and a very true one. Many believed, including myself, that Chapek would have stayed silent had no one stood up for themselves, but luckily, people took a stand. So where am I going with this? Well, they went on to say, "We at Pixar have personally witnessed beautiful stories full of diverse characters come back from Disney corporate reviews shaved down to crumbs of what they once were. Nearly every moment of overtly gay affection is cut at Disney's behest. Regardless of when there is protest from both the creative teams and executive leadership at Pixar, even if creating LGBTQIA+ content was the answer to fixing the discriminatory legislation in the world, we are being barred from creating it." I mean, whoa. So it's no secret that Disney does stunt some of Pixar's creativity. I mean, it's bluntly put how much policing they do on LGBTQ plus related content. I'm sure it doesn't stop there. So let's come together and determine when things might have changed the most compared to what we've come to love about Pixar. So in 2007, and don't worry, I'll eventually do separate videos on all these movies, but in 2006, Pixar began their tenure officially under Disney, debuting with well, it's like I said, it's an underrated classic to me that did really well in the box office too. The early years weren't bad at all. In fact, what we consider the golden era of Pixar continued on up until about 2010. Some may stop at '09 though. Pixar was killing it under Disney. After Cars in 2006, they dropped a masterpiece of a film with Ratatouille in '07. Then, arguably their best animated film with Wall-E in 2008. The movie with one of the saddest openings of all time with Up in 2009, and the film with the gut-wrenching ending, Toy Story 3 in 2010. Comparing Disney and Pixar from 2006 to 2010, you're looking at a pretty decent lineup. Disney didn't drop in '06, but in '07 made a great film with Meet the Robinsons. Look, I loved it when I was a kid, but Bolt is okay at best. In '09, Disney released a 2D animated film again, a very exciting film in my community at least, but ultimately very controversial with Princess and the Frog, but they certainly bounced back in 2010 with the hit that would probably convince Disney to never make a 2D animated film again, with one of my favorite films, Tangled. Please, Disney, just give us 2 damn traditionally animated movies a decade. Hell, 1 is fine. But anyways, it was a pretty competitive 4-year stretch when you look at names alone, but ultimately when you compare the numbers, dang, Pixar was killing them year after year. Even at this point, Pixar was making sequels, and under Disney, it was going to happen regardless. I think for many, Toy Story 3 was a surprise, but not a surprise, you know? But then, they made another sequel.
Sir Axelrod, I can explain. This is Mater. He's...
No, I know him. This is the bloke that called into the television show. You're the one I have to thank.
No, thank you. This trip's been amazing.
Ah,
He's a little excited, isn't he?
Mater?
Listen, even when I was a kid, I was like, what am I watching? I feel like this should have been a movie focusing on Lightning McQueen in his prime, especially when you consider the plot of the third film. Look, I love Mater, but to have an entire movie dedicated to him being a spy is it's just stupid. Francesco was cool though, but Mater was just so obnoxious in this film. I couldn't vibe with it, and apparently the masses didn't either. Regardless of how you feel about Rotten Tomatoes, this movie was rotten, and probably the first genuinely bad Pixar movie ever released. It looked pretty though, but Pixar needed to bounce back. They needed a revival, something that would truly tell the world that they were back.
I present my only son, who was besieged by 10,000 Romans, and he took out a whole armada single-handedly. With one arm. He was... With one arm.
Bro, what? They made pretty much a watered down Disney movie, and unfortunately for Pixar, Disney made a Pixar movie that same year. Thing is, I don't think Brave is bad, but man, Cars 2 just wasn't looking like a fluke anymore. Pixar would have 2 movies not be received well and would need to do something to get back on track with their admirers. Okay, not bad at all. I like Monsters University, not better than the first one, of course, but at this point, Pixar certainly wasn't carrying Disney. I mean, that same year Disney dropped Frozen, and this was everywhere. Granted, it's a good song, but the dominance Pixar had under Disney in the beginning was really fading. But at least Monsters University gave people hope, sequel or not. Okay, so with a bit of momentum under their belt, they were ready to take the world by storm again. They decided not to release a feature-length film the next year in 2014, but when trailers for this new Good Dinosaur started to make the rounds, I was excited, believe it or not. Inside Out was also everywhere in the same year of 2015, and when it came out, it ended up being an instant classic that I honestly, and hypocritically, can't wait to see the sequel for. Disney would take the year off as well, so I guess it makes sense why Pixar dropped 2 films in the same year. Granted, a lot was going on with the production of Good Dinosaur, which is probably why Pixar didn't release a feature-length film in 2014. Actually, yeah, I think it did get delayed. Anyways, I'll make a video on it in the future. It wasn't as bad as Cars 2 in my opinion, but coming off of the success of Inside Out, it was really tough for Pixar. I mean, you redeemed yourself with a classic like Inside Out, then unfortunately had your celebration cut short only like 5 months later. So they were back to trying to make a splash again. But honestly, I think this is the time Disney truly stepped in and the sequel started becoming more of a regular occurrence. 2016 brought Finding Dory and 2017 brought Cars 3. It wasn't a dark period for Pixar. These movies weren't bad. Dory ended up hitting $1 billion. Cars 3 didn't do well in the box office, but it would go down as the definitive part 2 in the Cars franchise. Regardless, they were sequels. Out of nowhere though, in October 2017, the same year Cars 3 would be released, at the Morelia International Film Festival in Mexico, Pixar would premiere Coco. It would become the #1 highest grossing film of all time in Mexico. They would carry this success over to the States the next month and it would go down as one of Pixar's greatest films ever made, making $814 million worldwide. One thing's for sure, when Pixar is backed up against the wall, they come back swinging. In 2018, Pixar used their momentum by starting to play it safe. For the first time in forever, we finally got our favorite super family back with Incredibles 2. Man, do you remember going to the theater, sitting down with your popcorn as the cast tells you how much they've been waiting for the sequel to? It was a great time, and everyone loved it. Although many did critique the story's plot as it sort of came off like the same story just with Elastigirl running the show, but we didn't care. That movie ended up making $1.2 billion. Say what you will about sequels, but we'd be hyped to see our childhood icons. And it wouldn't stop there. In 2019, Pixar released Toy Story 4, making another $1 billion. And although the ending bothered some, it was a success nonetheless. This movie couldn't come at a better time because something was coming. I mean, me and you knew what was happening. The world knew what was happening. Our president knew what was happening, but he ignored it, so whatever.
2020 is now the deadliest year in U.S. history.
Since late March, the U.S. has led the world with the most cases and the most deaths, now at more than 334,000. What began as a faraway outbreak in China.
There is growing concern at this hour over a possible outbreak.
Late 2019 was a tough time for me. I lost my grandmother, and COVID was starting to be taken a bit more seriously in the United States. In November of that year, Disney would launch Disney Plus. It was actually really exciting, but who knew how much damage it could cause to both Pixar, and you could even argue it hurt, or rather is hurting Disney. You see, Disney has had rapid declines of subscribers on the platform, whether it be because of people only subscribing for Star Wars or Marvel content, deals ending with particular sports companies that would result in losses of entire population sizes, allegedly or something, and simply not putting enough consistent content on the app. Netflix is somehow gaining subscribers somehow. Why is Disney failing? I guess those reasons are why, but I feel like it has to be more complicated than that. Maybe that can be a future discussion. So anyways, Pixar would fall victim to Disney Plus as well, with Disney not being able to decide which movies release in theaters or be day one on Disney Plus. They seem to fail every time, honestly. Onward would be released in theaters, and although it's not bad at all, it would ultimately only make $142 million. You have to factor in COVID as well, but it's just a really bad number. Soul would be received well, but would be another controversial film, at least in the Black community, but it wasn't bad. It was released on Disney Plus on Christmas for whatever reason, but ultimately didn't feel like the best place to release a feature-length film that looked as good as that. I mean, Soul is a beautiful movie. Onward is too, but man. Well, 2021 would continue the unfortunate Disney releases. Turning Red would come first. Now, I ain't a girl, man, and obviously I don't experience cycles, but this movie was absolutely amazing. It was relatable, whatever. It just was really good. How do you not release this in theaters? I think they released it in theaters without Disney Plus, but I mean, I guess I can't blame them for a pandemic, but something better could have been planned. I mean, a delay, maybe? I don't know. Encanto went to theaters, right? I don't know, Disney, that's kind of sus. I'm kidding, but Luca would end up debuting on Disney Plus and would be another great Pixar film that never got its definitive theatrical release. Maybe things would have been better if they delayed these films because in 2022, COVID was kinda over. Now, it wasn't a sequel, I guess, but Buzz Lightyear would make his way to the big screen in live action form. Well, within the Toy Stories universe, I think. It was a decent movie, but not the kind of movie I would think Andy or any kid of that generation would fall in love with. It made $226 million, barely exceeding its budget, but things were going back to normal in a way. It's 2023 now, and Pixar seems to be struggling with the same criticisms that they've been dealing with since 2011: sequels and not having the same creativity that they were once known for. Here's what I think. I don't think Pixar is losing their creativity. I think they still have it, but knowing they're owned by a multi-billion-dollar merchandising company that's been losing money, I'm starting to fear they don't have many options other than the safe options. The new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem was delayed probably because of Across the Spider-Verse. It's too late now, but part of me wishes Pixar would have waited to release Elemental. I heard it's pretty good, and a great story that details the lives of immigrants. That film has been getting slandered since the first trailer, and it doesn't help Pixar that we know they're making Toy Story 5 and Inside Out 2. Although I will see them, don't lie, you will too. Pixar has got to figure this out. I also want to mention art as well. I didn't really get to dive into that, but I don't think that Pixar needs to change their art style. I actually like what they do. They actually do try to change things up a little bit, but I feel if everybody tries to emulate that Spider-Verse style, eventually it'll become stale and people will turn on that too. I just wanted to get that out the way and try to, mention that before I ended the video. But anyways, with that being said, I know we'll never see the day that Disney literally frees Pixar, but I believe, and I'm sure you can all agree, they must be given full creative freedom. They need to be allowed to tell stories that represents groups they want to represent. They shouldn't have their work be deconstructed to appeal to people who probably don't have open minds to begin with. They should have all their feature-length films be released in theaters. They're Pixar, man. Like, what are we doing? Disney will never sell Pixar, but hopefully one day they will finally be able to tell the stories that made them stand out once again.